What's a NSFW detail about a historical figure that's normally left out of the history books? Lewis and Clark described the screaming sits that they got from eating unfamiliar food, in detail in their journals. It's becoming more well known, but Mozart wrote a chorale literally called, "Lick My Ass," to piss off the bishop who employed him in Salzburg, hoping to get fired so he could go to Vienna. After Alan Turing cracked the Enigma code, essentially ending WW 2 years earlier than expected and saving countless lives, he was thanked by the British government in the form of chemical castration, all because he was a gay man. Ancient Egyptians believed the god Atum created the universe by masturbating to ejaculation, and that the ebb and flow of the Nile corresponded to how much he came. To honor this, the pharaohs ceremonially masturbated into the river. A bit late to the party, but during WW1, prostitutes in Britain were more expensive if they had STDs. This was because if a soldier hired them and got infected, the soldier could be honorably discharged, and not have to fight in war. Probably said here elsewhere, but Victor Hugo, author of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, among other tales, was a notorious philanderer who had affairs on top of affairs with prostitutes throughout his life. When he died, all of the brothels in Paris had to close because so many prostitutes attended his funeral. Pyotr Tchaikovsky was a submissive bottom. In one note, never before published in Russian or English, Tchaikovsky wrote of a young servant, with whom I am more in love than ever, adding, "My God, what an angelic creature and how I long to be his slave, his plaything, his property." Patrick Henry, the American founding father better known for his quote, "Give me liberty or give me death," kept his wife imprisoned in a cellar because of her frequent outbursts due to postpartum depression. His wife had eventually died in that cellar, and he had buried her in an unmarked grave. 10 out of 10 quote, but the wife-killing part always seems to get left out of history texts. Ben Franklin was a notorious flirt, and hit on and/or plowed just about every woman he ever met. Single women, married women, young women, old women, women of title, women of the royal line, Protestant women, Catholic women, all of them. French President Flix Foray died while getting his dig sucked. Big digs were considered barbaric in ancient history. The Greeks especially thought that it showed men with big rock-hard full-blooded cocks were full of lust and low intelligence. This is why most of their statues today have them displaying a small dig. It's said that Henry VIII exploded in his coffin. Dogs then licked up the Henry juice. The first thing the father of microbiology, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, put under a microscope was semen. They understood that semen was integral to the creation of life but didn't yet understand the concept of single-cell organisms. He fully expected to see tiny little humans in his jizz. So yeah, the first thing he did was whack off on a slide and look at it. Princess Diana and her La Gadget, a sex toy that she carried around with her when she went on diplomatic trips. She had even shown a table of foreign officials her toy as a prank on numerous occasions. She also believed it brought her good luck. One time she forgot to bring it with her and actually asked a bodyguard to go back to the hotel to fetch it for her. Edit. Okay, just checked, and she apparently left it all the way back in the UK while on a trip to Nepal, not just at a hotel, and ordered it to be dispatched to the capital Kathmandu. Groom of the stool. This is the guy who wiped the king's bum and inspected the stool for parasites and whatnot in ye olde England. By the 16th century it had become one of the highest honors at the Tudor court because it allowed close and private access to the king, a coveted position. George Washington had severe hemorrhoids, to the extent that he couldn't even ride a horse into battle sometimes, and had to be pulled on a cart. Not hidden in his home country, but not known by the rest of the world though, is the fact that H.C. Anderson left a mark in his diary every time he had masturbated, sometimes with a little note on the side, with his thoughts about the session. After Alois Alzheimer gave the first ever speech describing the symptoms of what would later become known as Alzheimer's disease, no one in the audience asked him any questions or made any follow-up comments, despite the fact that this was quite literally one of the most important presentations ever given in the field of medicine. For real, Alzheimer's disease affects about 6% of people aged 65 and older. It's a big deal. So why did no one pay it much attention? Turns out they were all much more focused on the next guy on the docket, who, allegedly, was there to talk about compulsive masturbation. I'm sorry, but my source is in French. I can translate the beginning. King Louis XIV anal fistula. The anal fistula of King Louis XIV is one of the many illnesses that King Louis XIV had suffered. It was his surgeon Charles Francois Flix which carried the surgery successfully in 1686 after the development of a particular tool and a training on a dozen of indigents. The recovery of the king had a considerable impact in France and in Europe, and gave place to numerous civil and religious ceremonies in the kingdom. In school I was taught that Ben Franklin had a string of pearls that was several feet long. He would add a pearl to it each time he slept with a new woman. Paul Revere would ride from Boston to Newport Ree to cheat on his wife. President Grover Cleveland, 49, married Frances Folsom, 21, in the White House. He was basically her godfather and even bought her a baby bed when she was an infant. She knew him as Uncle Grover as a child and told him she wanted to marry him in the White House one day. Vox. Com. 2015 halves, 27 8,120,283, House of Cards marriage. Little late but worth a shot. Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell, the poets, had a 30-year letter exchange where Robert, while married, swooned over Elizabeth after he initially met her, declaring his love and want to propose for her all while being married, and her blatant denial and uncomfortable lesbian anguish at this fact. He threatens suicide and lots of self-harm while she's just like, haha, let's read this book together and not think about romance. He was a manic cocaine freak and she was a crazy alcoholic lesbian with a toucan. She drank rubbing alcohol when denied conventional drinks. There's a great play highlighting these events called Dear Elizabeth. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the last German emperor, wrote very sexual letters to his mum when he was a teenager. The great magician Houdini once escaped a prison cell while fully denude as to not hide anything to escape. However, what the guards failed to check was that he hid a skeleton key in his ass checks. Freud loathed cocaine. He had a friend with a morphine addiction, and he thought giving the guy cocaine would cure him. It did not. Abigail Adams apparently spent a lot of time worrying that her son John Quincy Adams would jerk off or bang wars when he left the house, and advised against doing both in several letters to him. There are digs everywhere in Pompeii. Dicks. Everywhere. On walls, streets, posts, carved into wood and stone, arranged in tile mosaics. They're all over the frockin' place. You can't swing a cat without whackin' a schlong. They're used as arrows to point to brothels. Scrawled on walls in graffiti about how good the women are in the city. When you went to the baths, you'd put your clothes in little cubbyholes, and you'd remember which column of cubbies you left them in by the mosaic of a particular 6-act above said column. Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, who also popularized Gothic literature, used to meet up with her future husband, poet Percy Shelley, at the cemetery where her mother was buried. They would meet up and have angsty sex on her mother's grave. BC. She was goth as hell. Moreover, Frankenstein was inspired by her fascination with reanimation, the idea of bringing something dead back to life. When she learned about this idea, she was obsessed with the idea of bringing back her baby who died days later after being born, thus sparking the idea of the monster of Frankenstein. William the Bastard's family was torn apart when his two youngest sons dumped a chamber pot on the head of his firstborn, leading to rebellions, wars, and eventually his firstborn's lifelong imprisonment. Sim Bolvar had 6 in every country he went with different women, and it's explained with details in his biography. He was a really good dancer. I read once that philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau would pull his pants down and chase after women running backwards in hopes they would spank him. It was his kink. The Diary of William Byrd II. He talks about his wife being depressed, so he gives her a flourish and she feels better. That's an orgasm. On April 30, 1711, he noted in his diary that although he discovered his wife in a melancholy mood, the powerful flourish he delivered filled her with great ecstasy and refreshment. He recalled one morning during which I lay in my wife's arms, while, during another, his wife kept me so long in bed that I rogered her. The Paris Review. Org. Blog. The 13th of May 2015, Roger that. One of the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition was a slave named York. The tribes they came across were quite taken with him. He fathered many children during the trip. Alexander the Great likely had a gay lover named Hephaestion. Diogenes supposedly claimed that Alexander only ever yielded to Hephaestion's thighs. Apparently, Alexander also spent the modern-day equivalent of $300 million on his funeral. Ben Franklin slept around and mostly stayed in France for the prostitution. Leonardo da Vinci kept poems and jokes about penises. Oscar Wilde described himself as addicted to sucking cock and said it inspired him. Schrödinger got with a ton of prostitutes so that he could take care of his male urges and thus focus on his work, leaving him the option of not taking a wife who may take him away from his work. Gouverneur Morris wrote the language to much of the Constitution, including the preamble. He also had a wooden leg because he broke it so bad it had to be amputated. The accepted story is that his leg was caught in the reins of his horse as they got spooked, but the rumor that went around was he broke his leg jumping from a window to escape the husband of a woman he was sleeping with. In revolutionary France, a crowd surrounded his carriage because they thought he was a French aristocrat. He took his wooden leg off and pointed it at them, saying he lost his leg in the pursuit of liberty. He also died from complications after using a whalebone as a catheter. The Roman Emperor Elagabalus, as a show of power upon entering Rome to become crowned emperor, he had hundreds of naked women drag his chariot down the streets of Rome. Anne Bonny used to fight with one boob out, just to show that not only are you about to get murdered, but you're about to get murdered by an 18-year-old girl. Benjamin Franklin liked to take air baths, which meant sitting in the window of his London house with the windows open, totally denude. I have visited that very house, which is now a museum, and stood in that very window. They are big Georgian-style windows, and I suspect that anyone in the house opposite, or possibly even glancing up from the street from the right angle, direction, would have seen the full founding father. Ben Franklin wasn't allowed to contribute to writing the Declaration of Independence because they were afraid he'd put dig jokes in it. Raphael, the Italian painter, not the Ninja Turtle, is believed to have died from exhaustion from non-stop 6. Edgar Allan Poe married his 13-year-old cousin and would sleep in her coffin with her after she passed away. John Batman, one of the founders of Melbourne, Australia, actually died of syphilis and lost his nose due to the disease. He ended up in a wheelchair and his wife left him when he got sick for a close friend. None of the history books ever mention the mysterious flying turd on Apollo 10. You can find the full transcript here. The poop incident starts on page 416 if anyone want to read more. Edit. Direct link. Benjamin Franklin was the first known source of the phrase, "just put a bag over her head." During Mexico's independence fight there was a lady called La Guerra Rodriguez. That means, Rodriguez the Blonde. She used to spy on the Spanish monarchy generals by going to bed with them. She passed information to the independent army and had a major role on Mexico's winning the fight. After the independence was declared, the new monarch, Agustin de Iturbide, made the entire army march in front of La Guerra's house. They were lovers and she was the one that inspired him to action. She was also lover of Alexander von Humboldt and Simon Bolivar. She also escaped the Inquisition trial by showing her boobs. She is never mentioned in the traditional history books or school lessons. I'm currently reading a book about pirates, and in the chapter about Edward Teach, aka Blackbeard, it mentions when he married his 14th wife, who was a 16-year-old girl, and after being with her all night, and I quote, "it was his custom to invite 5 or 6 of his brutal companions to come ashore, and he would force her to prostitute herself to them all, one after another, before his face." Now, I remember learning about Blackbeard in school as a child, and I do not recall anyone ever telling me he was a pimp and a cuck. Frederick the Great of Prussia, one of the most renowned military, national leaders in European history, flaming gay. He never even tried to hide it much. His dad openly loathed his effeminate behaviors. He had a Dutch boyfriend as a teenager, who his father had executed in front of his own eyes to teach him a lesson. His dad later forced him to marry a woman, who he immediately divorced after his dad's death. He even wrote after losing a battle, "Fortune has it in for me, she is a woman, and I am not that way inclined." Not to say being anything other than straight is inherently NSFW. But anything not heterosexual in history is obviously almost never talked about. Napoleon insisted his wife wear the same underwear for weeks on end because he loved the smell so much. He would keep soiled underwear with him and write about how much he enjoyed the scent. During 1942, in a war-planning visit to Washington, a British delegation including Winston Churchill stayed at the White House. The president wheeled into Churchill's bedroom one afternoon to discover the prime minister stalking the room in the denude, puffing on a cigar as he dictated to a male secretary. As Roosevelt spun about to leave, Churchill called him back, adding, "The Prime Minister of Britain has nothing to conceal from the President of the United States." Edit. Wow, my first popular post. Source for this story. Cray, E. 1990. General of the Army, George C. Marshall, soldier and statesman. Kindle ed. pp. 253, Cooper Square Press. Margaret Mitchell, author of Gone with the Wind, apparently had a very large dildo collection. Learned this in a graduate history class and I was floored. John Smith, he made up the story of Pocahontas. She was actually 10 when he arrived, and he made up a lot of his stories. Henry Ford was the only American mentioned in Hitler's writings due to his anti-Semitic beliefs. Julius Caesar frocked around, like, all the way around, his political allies' wives. One of Pompey's wives for example, not Julia, his enemies' sisters. Cato the Younger's, guys, girls, anybody. He was described during a meeting of the Senate as, a man for every woman, and a woman for every man. Adolf Hitler may have had a sexual relationship with his niece, at the very least, they were very close and he was extremely possessive of her. He got jealous whenever she'd have boyfriends and would try to break them up. After she committed suicide he called her the only woman he'd ever loved, and insisted on keeping her bedroom exactly as it had been when she was living. Anthropologists believe that upwards of 5 to 7% of people alive today have some sort of relation to Genghis Khan. That's because he allegedly raped several women everywhere he conquered before moving on to the next place. Churchill was a bit of a nudist. He claimed to have some form of skin condition that made clothes uncomfortable to wear for long periods. When he visited the White House he would sit around naked while having discussions with FDR. Helen Keller supported eugenics to the point of writing a journal in favor of refusing medical treatment to human babies with physical and mental disabilities, going as far to state that they would likely become criminals if kept alive. Edit. I never expected to get more than 5,000 upvotes on this, but thank you for finding my contribution of interest. Anne Frank, being a normal teen with a diary, has some puberty parts. Spartan soldiers had gay sex with each other, a lot. Soldiers were taken as little boys and didn't see women since they believed having gay sex would create a closer bond with each other. Edit. When they left the army and married, women would sometimes shave airheads and wear men's clothing to make the former soldier feel more comfortable. Hitler took amphetamines to stop farting. Some historians think that's why he became increasingly erratic toward the end. He was in withdrawal. Ben Franklin had tons of sex with many women. He even wrote some sex advice in some of his books. Mozart wrote songs about licking ass. It's possible that 16th-century samurai warlord Uesugi Kenshin was actually a woman pretending to be a man so that her clan could survive her father's death. Kenshin never married or had any concubines, had to plan battles around regular monthly abdominal pain, and is referred to in the notes of a Spanish missionary as someone's tia, instead of tio, aunt, not uncle. Hans Christian Andersen wrote The Little Mermaid for his gay crush who rejected him. I mean, it's pretty well known, but not something that you'd be taught in school. JFK fucked. Obviously there was Marilyn Monroe, but apparently he also had a thing for prostitutes, that thing being his presidential penis. He has been quoted by a British Prime Minister as saying, "If I go 3 days without a lay I get a headache." Washington's wooden teeth were only part wood. Ivory and the teeth of slaves were part of his dentures. I have no clue if this counts, but one of Little Richard's most well-known songs, Tutti Frutti, is about hardcore butt frocking, and he was really into butt stuff. Comanche chief Buffalo Hump's name was not translated correctly. Or if it was quietly altered in written records so as to not shock Anglos. Those 1840s Texans were squeamish about such things. His name properly translated into English would have been Erection That Will Not Go Away. Andrew Jackson used to participate in duels. He would usually let his opponent shoot first so he had time to line up his shot. In one particular duel his opponent shot him and the bullet got lodged in his rib cage and he survived. Jackson ended up shooting his opponent in the balls and killed him. While Ekaterina, Catherine the Great, did not sleep with any farm animal, primarily a horse. She was rumored to have about 30 lovers. And I don't know if this is true or not, but at a party at court, a noble lady joked that Catherine was basically a salute and probably had around 3 guys in her at once. Catherine responded with, "On a slow day, yes." Everyone likes a good s'more, gooey marshmallow and chocolate between 2 graham crackers. But graham crackers are a bit bland, aren't they? 19th century temperance preacher named Sylvester Graham, preacher bland diets and veganism to be closer to God. His followers created crackers and named them after Graham, as the crackers were meant to minimize pleasure and stimulation. They were not supposed to tasty. They were supposed to be boring and dry as to not tempt people away from the Lord. J.S. Bach married his cousin. It was normal at the time. JFK did a fair amount of fingerbanging in the Oval Office. Till all our ancestors were kinky frocks. History hasn't changed much. Rasputin, the legendary man from Russia in the early 20th century, was a womanizer that had orgies repeatedly with his cult of followers repeatedly. Some accounts say he also had an affair with the emperor's wife at the time as well. His 13-inch penis is on display in a museum of erotica somewhere. Egyptians and their mummies. Just search for thing didn't know about Egyptians, and learn new things. Fact: King Tut was discovered with a boner. The first state to let women vote, Wyoming, did so largely because of the prostitution business, although my 8th grade teacher taught us that even if it wasn't in the book so. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, married a 14-year-old when he was 37. She was one of his many wives and Smith told her it would ensure her eternal salvation. Walt Whitman and Oscar Wilde dated. They exchanged romantic letters and Whitman was once quoted saying, "I have the kiss of Oscar Wilde on my lips." Michelangelo loathed the church, so when he was forced to paint the Sistine Chapel, he didn't exactly respect their wishes. He put in several hidden symbolism and objects as defiance, such as a baby basically going, "Frock off," to the Pope, Hell's Gates behind the seat of the Pope, and some say he made men naked not as some purity thing or whatever, but as a reference to homosexuality and basically going, "Lol, have fun looking at dudes' digs and awe." Ben Franklin was a nudist who believed strongly in the value of air baths and was addicted to laudanum, which was an opium-based syrup. How about a NSFW detail that's normally left in that shouldn't be? Catherine the Great did not die attempting sex with a horse. Louis XVI had phimosis. It was one of the contributing factors to the French Revolution. Lyndon B. Johnson had a huge dig and frequently whipped it out around various people. Edit. Thanks to whomever gave me my first ever award on this platform. On a post about one of our former presidents' dig no less. Female pirates opened their shirts to show their victims that they had been slain by a woman. And my Google history now looks like a psychopath's lol. Just to sum up the comment section. Ben Franklin was thorny. LBJ's massive dong. Dom Pedro I wrote a lot of letters to his lover. He even mentions STD in these letters. He also calls himself the Great Demon. There's a book called Titlia e o Demono, Cartas Inditas de D. Pedro I Marquesa de Santos, where you can find these letters. Edit. I meant STD and not DST. Sorry about that. Half these comments are about Ben Franklin laying pipe. What a frocking Chad. King Leopold II killed 2 to 10 million people in the Congo. Most people never heard of him. Darwin had 10 children with his first cousin. 3 of them died. Christopher Columbus also sold 6 slaves that were usually around the age of 9. That was preferable in the time period. Edit. Wow, I never expected one of my most popular comments was going to be about Columbus's 6 slaves. Sigmund Freud loved cocaine way too much and he came up with the penis envy theory. Penis envy being that all women secretly want a penis. IDK if that's NSFW enough for you. But Sigmund Freud was a weird guy nonetheless. How awful battlefields smell. Mahatma Gandhi slept naked with women to test how far his chastity could go. Apparently his reasoning was that if he didn't do it, it would be a sign of weakness in his vow of celibacy.